Hello. It's good to be back with you again. I am excited about today's lesson. It is one of my all-time favorites, and I haven't done it in several years. So those of you who have been with me for a long, long time, back when I was teaching Mark, you might remember it back then. Not even sure when that was. But you'll still like the lesson because I always find something new, and you forget so much. I don't usually forget because I go over the stories so much, but I love studying it again because I always find new things. So this is in Mark in three different chapters, four columns. The first column is from chapter 8. The second column is from chapter 9, and the third column is from chapter 10. And the fourth column, that is from the second half of chapter 10, or the fourth of chapter 10. But here's what I'd like you to do. I would like you to put this on pause, and then I want you to read through it. And I want you to compare the first three columns. Now, the third column goes into the fourth column. Do you see that? So what I want you to do is, you don't have to do that number 4. You can read it. But what I want you to do is compare those first three stories. They're each a chapter apart, and there's other stories that separate these three stories. But these three stories are held together by common ideas, common words, common things that happen in each one of them. So you would be really in the gifted and talented class if you just pause this and go and read the three columns and find the things that are the same in each column. Now, I'll tell you this, there are 4 things the same in each column. Now, the first thing that's the same in each column, now look down, you see in bold print, on the way, don't you? And on the way in the second column, and then on the way in the third column. That's the same in each column, on the way. There are 1, 2, 3 things that are other things that are the same in each column. Maybe different words, but the same ideas in those columns. So if you can do that. Now, I don't know if you can see on here, but I have the three things in different colors. So if you like to color, here's your chance. Go through it first, see if you can figure it out, and then color it in. Okay? Now, let me just backtrack because you see the on the way, right? That stems from something that's said at the very beginning of the book of Mark, and that is that there's going to be someone who's preparing the way for the Lord. Now, this is a quote from the Old Testament, but it's telling us that there's someone going to prepare the way for Jesus, who's called the Lord. And this someone is John the Baptist. And he's preparing the way for the Lord, preaching and teaching about repentance. So he's preparing the Lord's way because the Lord preaches and teaches about repentance. But John the Baptist doesn't just preach and by that prepare the way for the Lord, but he also does this. He's arrested, he's put to death, and he's buried by his disciples. And that's exactly what will happen. In fact, the same words are used about Jesus. He is arrested. He's buried by his disciples, and um, he dies. He dies, and then he's buried by one of his disciples. And so John the Baptist prepares the way of the Lord by doing exactly what the Lord is going to do too, dying and buried. Okay, so here's what I want you to do. You go on and you put this on pause, read through, and see if you can find the things that are the same in each one of these texts. Okay, back again. What we're going to do is read through it. You can't read through it enough. Let me tell you, reading and reading and reading again and again and again is the one thing that separates you from the scholar. The scholar, the most important thing that scholar does is read, reread, and reread again. Because then he really understands the text. Then he can see all the repetitions. He can figure out what each text means in its context because he's reading and rereading. And that's what I asked you to do. So let's read through the first column. Jesus went out to the villages of Caesarea Philippi, and on the way he questioned his disciples, saying to them, "Who do you say that I am?" Peter answered, "You are the Christ." And he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. And he was stating the matter plainly. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning around and seeing his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan. For you are not setting your mind on God's interests, but on man's." And he called the crowd with his disciples and said to them, "If anyone wishes to get behind me, he must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me." Okay, so he starts out, went out to the villages of Caesarea Philippi and on the way. Now we know that he's going through Caesarea Philippi and he's going through the different villages, but we don't know where he's on the way to. And so he's just not telling us that. He's just telling us that he's walking along the way. So the final destination is not given. Then another thing comes up. He calls himself, or there's this person he's speaking of, he calls him the Son of Man. Now this is an idiom for man. So Jesus could have said, the man must suffer many things. So it's such a general statement that you're going to see that the disciples are just not going to get it. And then it says this, and he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes and be killed and after 3 days rise again. And he was stating the matter plainly. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. But turning around and seeing his disciples, he rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan, for you are not setting your mind on God's interests, but on man's." And he called the crowd with his disciples and said to them, "If anyone wishes to get behind me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me." There's some items here that are going to be repeated in the next column, so we're not going to point them out quite yet, but I do want to look at some things. For one thing, did you notice that Peter takes him aside and he begins to rebuke him? Peter just doesn't get it, does he? And in each of these 3 columns, the disciples just are not going to get it. Peter doesn't get it. He represents the disciples in the book of Mark. And the disciples don't get it either, as you're going to see in the other two pericopes. So I want you to take note of that. Okay, so let's see what's the same in the second column. Mark 9:30. From there, they went out and began to go through Galilee. So they went through Caesarea Philippi. Now they're going through Galilee. Now remember, between these two texts, there's several other stories. So they're not in the Bible next to each other. They are in my columns because the author is telling me to put them in columns and be able to note the things that are the same in each of these columns. See, he's talking to me, saying, Barbara, put them in columns so that people can see that they are closely related. They have the same terms and the same ideas in each one. So, they went out, and he was teaching his disciples and telling them, the Son of Man is to be delivered into the hands of men, and they will kill him. And when he has been killed, he will rise 3 days later. But they did not understand this statement. They're not getting it, are they? And they were afraid to ask him. They came to Capernaum. And when he was in the house, he began to question them. What were you discussing on the way? But they kept silent, for on the way they had discussed with one another which of them was greatest. Wait a second. Hold on. What had he just told them in column 1, just a chapter before? Well, he had told them down in verse 34, if anyone wishes to get behind me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. What has that got to do with who is the greatest of us? Huh? They're not getting it, are they? So sitting down, he called the 12 and said to them, if anyone wants to be first, he shall be last of all and servant of all. Did you take note of the things that were the same? Let's see if you got them. Well, we have this reference to the Son of Man in both columns. And with that reference to the Son of Man, what's going to happen to him? Well, he's going to suffer, die, and rise again, isn't he? But notice who's culpable. It says that he'll be delivered into the hands of men. It doesn't specify. Do these men represent mankind altogether? The first column is the religious leader. Second column, men. Hands of men. No, it's not saying religious leaders. It's not saying the Jews. It's just saying men, isn't it? Men are culpable. And then it tells us in verse 32, they did not understand this statement. See, they didn't understand any more than Peter did in the first column when he takes Jesus aside and rebukes him. Gets in Jesus' face. Can you imagine getting in Jesus' face and rebuking him? I can't get over that one. On the way, on the way. Did you notice that? Twice it's like saying, take note of me. On the way. So they're discussing. Notice in verse 35, he sits down and he, what? Called his disciples, the 12. Notice in the first column in verse 34, he called the crowd and his disciples. So he's calling his disciples and he's saying, listen, please listen, you're not getting it here. So let me tell you again. If anyone wants to be first, he shall be last of all and servant of all. Christianity turns the world upside down. Nothing like it in any religion from antiquity to the present. Calls people to deny themselves in following Jesus. Notice that he says that. Get behind me. That means we're following Jesus and what he did. And he says, deny yourself. Who wants to deny themselves? Nobody. Not in antiquity, not in the present. You don't want to deny yourself. I'm sorry, no matter how saintly you may look. I don't want, and I'm not saintly, believe me. I don't want to deny myself. I want the bigger piece. I want front row seat. I want acclaim. I'm sorry. I am not St. Barbara. No, I ain't. And neither are you. But I certainly am not. I can't say too much about you, but because I don't, you know. But I can say it about me. The Barbara here, sitting here, does not want to deny herself. She wants to get even. She wants to get the better part. She wants to be first, not last, not in the middle. First, number one. Sorry, guys. Hate to tell you this, but Barbara Arnold does not want to deny herself. And in the second column, it tells us we need to be last and servant of all, as Jesus is servant. He asks us to be servant. Now, let me explain to you this word servant. I know we translate it servant, but it's doulos in the Greek, and that's a slave. Now, there's a big difference between a servant and a slave. Can any of you think about how different it is between being a servant and being a slave? I'll give you a second. A servant can say no. Can he? Not a slave. Slave can't say no. You don't say no to Jesus. And if he says to deny yourself, if he says to be a slave, then you have to say, yes, Lord. And it's so hard. You know what I found? Practicing denial of self and servanthood in the small things prepares us for being a self-denier in the big things. It really does. Let me give you a couple of examples. You know, you're cutting a slice of cake. You're going to give one slice to your husband, one slice to yourself. Who gets the bigger slice? Oh, I know. You were looking. You were trying to be even, Stephen. But it was just a little bigger for the one slice. And without letting your husband know, what do? You take the bigger slice. I know so many of you don't do that. You're kinder than I am. Then there's on the highway. I mean, nobody's going to notice. They're going to notice, but they're not going to know who you are when you speed up or when you try to get through that yellow light and deny the other person a chance to go take a left turn. But here's where self-denial is the most important. It's when nobody knows you and you do it. Nobody's going to clap their hands and tell you you're a good guy. You do it behind people's back. You do it. You deny yourself. You become last without drawing attention to yourself. And that is hard. That is hard. It's a choice, and it's not an easy choice, but do it in the small things. Practice it daily. Say one time today, I'm going to say no to me and yes to whoever, a stranger, a neighbor, your husband, or your wife. Now, I know it's easy to do it for your children. Yeah, so okay. That's not, no, that doesn't count, because that's kind of easy to do that, isn't it? To deny yourself. I can remember my mother doing that. She would deny herself. So let's look at, so he called and in the second column, and he calls in the first column, and he tells them how to be a servant, doesn't he? That's the same thing. So the one thing is he predicts his death, burial, and resurrection. The other thing is that he calls his disciples, and then he talks about servanthood, doesn't he? And of course, that added extra that I'm sharing with you is they don't get it, and so now he has to do it a third time. Reminds us of how thick we are. Let's do the third column. They were on the way, going up to Jerusalem, and Jesus was walking on ahead of them. Look at this. It tells us where he's going finally. He's on the way to Jerusalem. What's going to happen in Jerusalem? He's going to die and rise again. On the way. And what's Jesus doing? He's going on ahead of them. They're following because he's walking briskly. Where's he walking briskly to? To his death, burial, resurrection. And they were amazed, and those who followed were fearful. So we have fearful followers. And again, he took the 12 aside and began to tell them what was going to happen to him, saying, here it is, prophecy. He says, behold, we are going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man, there it is again, will be delivered to the chief priests and the scribes, and they will condemn him to death and will hand him over to the Gentiles. Who's culpable for his death this time? Yes, the Jews hand him over, but who's culpable for his death? The Gentiles. The Gentiles are. So in the first column, it's the Jews who are culpable. In the second column, it's man, hands of men. In the third column, it's the Gentiles. Who's culpable? All mankind. They will mock him and spit on him and scourge him and kill him, and 3 days later he will rise again. James and John came up to Jesus, you would think. He has just explained it a third time, that what is going to happen to the Son of Man. Now, all through Mark, he has called himself the Son of Man. They should have gotten it, but they're not getting it. James and John came up to Jesus saying, Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you. And he said to them, What do you want me to do for you? And they said, Grant that we may sit, one on your right and one on your left, in your glory. Oh, no, they didn't get it again. Didn't he say, deny yourself, take up your cross and follow him? Hadn't he said to be last and to be servant or slave of all? And they're not getting it because one wants to be on the right hand and one wants to be on the left hand of Jesus in his kingdom, and that is not last of all, is it? So it says, calling them to himself, Jesus said to them, here it goes, whoever wishes to become great among you will be your servant. There it is again, be your servant. And we're in the top of the fourth column. And whoever wishes to be first among you will be slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served. Who's the Son of Man? Jesus. He didn't come to be served, but to serve. He did not come to be served, and he should have been served, but he came to serve and to give his life a ransom for many. So he's not just asking his disciples to do this. He's doing it himself. That's why he says, follow me, get behind me. And what I'm doing, that's what you're to do. And you're to be last. And you're to deny yourself. And you're to serve or slave for everybody else. And I don't want you to try to be first. I want you to try to be last of all. Did you see the same things going on in the third column as in the first two? We're on the way. This time we're told we're on the way to Jerusalem, and they're following him, right? And then he does another prediction. He did a prediction about his death, burial, and resurrection in the first two columns. And now in the third column, he did a prediction. Then it says, grant that we may sit one on your right hand and on your left in your glory. They are not getting it, are they? And he says, he calls. He's calling them. And then he has a servanthood passage here. How to be the best servant of all. Be last. Deny yourself. Be a slave. Yep. Make yourself last. Got that? Okay. Let's see. Well, I'm going to come back to this next week because we didn't finish it off. So I'm going to let you go today. And God bless you. And every day, choose something where you are denying yourself of something that you would really like to have yourself, but you're letting the other person have it. Practice denying yourself in the little things, and then it'll become easier with the big things. Okay? I love you guys, and I miss you terribly. Bye-bye.